Well, can't say much for their craftsmanship, Harmy said with a grunt. It's not pretty, but it looks like it'll hold up to an extended assault. I shook my head in disgust. We finished our examination of the enemy's encampment and turned back to our own. Harmy and I had decided to personally confirm the scouts' reports. The drow had erected wooden barricades around the village and were keeping them wet to prevent fires. They had made the barricades high enough to make it difficult to get attacks over them, too. Any mage that got close enough to send a spell over those walls would also be close enough to suddenly sprout an arrow from between their eyes. What was this village's name? I asked as we walked. Dunno, Harmy shrugged. It isn't on the map because it isn't a recognized settlement. It's too close to the border for that. Really? I wouldn't think that they've had issues with the drow before. The buildings look like they've been there for quite a while. Yeah, well, they probably have been. Lofin's armies usually do their thing quite a ways to the east of here, so these guys were probably left alone for the most part. Maybe got a visit or two from our boys now and then, but they've probably never even seen a drow, until now. But they're still close enough to be in the settlement prohibition zone? Do you think they knew that? They would have had to. Whoever they got the land from, a rancher probably, would have had to tell them. Plus, that settlement is large enough to have applied to be a village, and there's no way they'd miss out on the benefits by choice. If they applied, they would have been told to vacate the area. Damn. If they knew, why'd they risk it? Well, after enough repetitions, things become routine, and routine tricks you into believing that you have an understanding of things. That combined with how cheap the land would have been probably led to this. So what do you think? They're either dead, slaves, or hostages now, Grum. Hells, probably worse if your paw's right about the vampires. Put them from your mind, we've got shit to do. Yeah, I nodded solemnly. We entered the camp we had made yesterday, and a quick look around confirmed that it was bustling with activity. Axes were being sharpened, cooks were stoking fires, and the mages were tending to their narses. Our forces now totaled 1,000 infantry and 30 mounted mages. The drow may have more soldiers than we do, but if we were to fight them afield, we'd be able to wipe the floor with them. Unfortunately, they seem to have realized that. "Chief Ormyar!" someone shouted. The shout sounded as if it was directed at me, which caused my head to snap toward the sound. One of the newer scouts was running toward me. I ceased my stride and crossed my arms, affixing the approaching scout with a glare. I noticed a rare smile on Harmy's face as the scout caught up to us. "I'm not the chief. My father is," I said firmly. "Sorry, sir," the scout said, trying to control her breathing. "I've got a report, and I'll hear it in a moment. I want you to be sure that it doesn't happen again. My father is the greatest chief Blurpus has ever seen, and I won't tolerate any semblance of disrespect toward him. Understood?" Yes, sir." "Good. Report." "We found the caravan from Yurna that had the supplies to make weapons. It was attacked." "Any survivors?" "We don't know for sure. They burned those that fell, drow and orc alike, loaded them into the carts and set them ablaze. Couldn't get an accurate count of the remains." "Were you able to get eyes on the force that ambushed them?" I asked, uncrossing my arms and placing my hands on my hips. "No, sir. They were hit right after they crossed the border into Blurpus. Scoutmaster says that it had to have happened days ago, according to their itinerary." "Understood. Tell the Scoutmaster to get back to regular patrols, then." The scout nodded and began jogging away. I took a deep breath through my nose, stifling my rising anger, and let the air out with a heavy sigh. "Fuck," I grumbled under my breath. "Good call. Sending the scouts to check on the caravan," Harmy noted. "It is fortunate that we now know that we can't rely on archers." "Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Whoever this little bastard is, he's far too clever for my liking," I said. "Not only was he able to tell that we had sent our smithing supplies to Yurna, he was able to determine that we would be having them shipped back and where they would be. Nah, he probably set up multiple ambush sites. That's what I would do. I'd put a team on any path big enough for a cart." "Yeah, you're probably right," I absent-mindedly agreed, my mind already on what our next step should be. The caravan didn't just have weapon-making materials, it had actual smiths and fletchers. Smiths that can perform maintenance are a copper a dozen, but the ones that can create new works from raw materials are worth their weight in silver. Proper Fletchers are even rarer, and it would take quite a while to find one willing to travel to Blurpus. If we had been able to outfit our archers and train some new ones, we would have been able to assault the enemy camp. Archers can fire faster than mages can, which may have allowed us to suppress the enemy behind their barricades long enough for the mages to lob spells over their walls. Hell, they might have even been able to get close enough to use spells that would destroy the barricades entirely. Most archers know how to maintain their bows and make arrows in a pinch, but most of them don't know how to craft bows or mass-produce arrows. Their makeshift arrows are also a lot less accurate than those made by the professionals. No matter how I look at it, it looks like we're going to have to lay siege to the drow and try to starve them out. "Oh, here we go again," Harmy said, gesturing at another scout jogging toward us. As the orc approached, I noticed that we were mistaken with our initial impression. This orc wasn't a scout. The two axe handles smacking against his thighs as he ran was a dead giveaway of his status as infantry. As he drew closer, I tried to figure out why he would possibly be running to speak to us. "Mornin', Chiefkin," the large orc said. "Sergeant Balug wanted me to get you." "Sergeant Balug? What for?" I asked. "It's a surprise, sir." "I don't like surprises." I crossed my arms again. "Tell me what he wants." "Sergeant Balug's a lot bigger than you," he chuckled. Sir, plus we all want to see your reaction." "Balug may be bigger, but the Chiefkin can have you flogged," Harmy interjected. The big orc took a moment to think about this, biting his lip as his brain worked harder than it likely ever has. "I guess so. But even if you flog me to death, my mum'd recognize the body," he shrugged. "If I ruin the surprise and the boys get at me, she won't even recognize my big toe. Sir?" "It's that good of a surprise?" I asked incredulously. "Oh yeah. Your reaction'll be worth taking a few licks from the whip, if you want me to, sir." I shared a glance with Harmy, who gave a defeated shrug in the face of the country orc's stubbornness. "Fine," I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Lead on." The unruly infantry orc led us through the camp and into the woods. Being unused to traveling without a path, I made certain to watch my footing. Despite my care, I quickly fell behind. The other two seemed to be able to predict the roots and divots that littered the ground and had to stop and wait for me to catch up repeatedly. By the time we arrived at Sergeant Balug's location, my embarrassment and frustration was at a boiling point. Once the ground was clear of obstacles, I pointedly marched after our guide, ready to be harsh with whatever I was about to be shown. However, all of my anger quickly melted away once I saw the surprise. My eyes widened and my jaw dropped. "The fuck?" Harmy asked with a shocked softness. "Ah, Chiefkin! Oh, and you brought Captain Harmy too!" Sergeant Balug exclaimed. "Surprise!" A mewling whine came from a gigantic creature that had somehow been trussed up. The sound was disturbingly similar to a pupper that had just been told off, but much louder. Its head was covered in metallic-looking spikes, and the creature's red and yellow hide clashed horribly with the various greens of the surrounding foliage. Each of its bound arms and legs ended in 3 enormous claws, which were also tied together. It struggled against its bindings to no avail, and whined again. As it did so, I caught a glimpse of rows upon rows of sharpened fangs within its maw. "What in the hells is that?" I asked, regaining some of my composure. "It's a gift from the gods, a Nahalim to be specific. Young one too, judging by its size," Balug said with a prideful grin. "One of our boys was out taking a leak and found it while it was napping. Once he let me know about it, we grabbed all the rope we could carry and tied it up good and proper." I took a moment to digest this information, then turned to look at the sergeant. He towered over me, but despite his appearances and upbringing and mannerisms, he's one of the most educated orcs I know. When he says a gift from the gods in this context, it could mean literally anything. "Okay, so what's a Nahalim and why is it a gift?" I asked. "Please don't tell me you're planning on trying to eat the fucking thing," Harmy added. "Pretty sure those are poisonous. Venomous, not poisonous, and no, they taste like shit. Anyhow, to answer your question, Chiefkin, A Nahalim is one of them old biological weapons that they were using during the Cataclysm Wars. They were mostly meant for cracking open castles, but they also saw some use as anti-infantry. You see 'em now and again on the edges of the wastes where I grew up. Balog's grin somehow grew. And it's a gift, 'cause if you've got the balls, you can train it. I nodded along and then froze once he finished his sentence. The fuck did you just say? I asked, unable to believe my ears. Balog's men tried to hide their laughter, unsuccessfully. Train it, sir. There was a guy who lived in the wastes who had a couple of 'em as pets, hunted with 'em and everything. Said they're just like giant puppers, so long's you treat them proper. He nodded sagely. Of course, they ate him in the end, but we're pretty sure he died of natural causes first. Pretty sure, I repeated. Yep, give me a few days and I'll have this boy, or maybe girl, it's hard to tell. Anyway, I'll have it ready and raring to tear up some drow in no time. What are you going to feed it? Harmy asked. We got drow prisoners, don't we? Balog raised an eyebrow. Absolutely not, I said. We aren't feeding our prisoners to this thing. Not only would that be morally repugnant, it would also be in violation of the law of the land, and the High Chief would certainly have our heads. Well, what if we kept it a secret? You're willing to gamble your life that none of your boys will get too sauced and tell this story. Fat fucking chance, Sergeant. No. Damn. You got a good point, sir. Well, boys, what do you think? Balog turned to his orcs. Willing to go on half rations to feed the beast? The sounds of not quite suppressed mirth died out immediately and was replaced with a tense and contemplative silence that was only broken by the occasional whine from the Nahalim. The soldiers looked between their sergeant and the Nahalim studiously. The subject of their internal conflict was painfully obvious. The stomach is one of the two organs that infantry does their thinking with. The other organ they use to think is somewhat up for debate. Fuck it, I'm game, one of the soldiers said. The other soldiers looked at the one that spoke up, and a few of them shrugged. One by one, they gave their assent to the sergeant's plan. Once everyone was in agreement, Sergeant Balog turned back to me. There you have it, sir. We'll feed it with our own rations and get it nice and trained up for an assault on the enemy, he said with a smug grin. Will that be all right? If you can't train it, will you be able to kill it? I asked. Yes, sir. It bleeds just like everything else. Worst case scenario, we lose a few. But I got a look at the enemy's barricade earlier, and I'm pretty sure that we'll be losing more orcs without the Nahalim than we would if it went wild. You might be right. How exactly are you going to train this thing? We don't have cages big enough to hold it. Oh, we'll secure it in such a way that it can't run around and let it get familiar with us. Positive reinforcement and the like goes a long way with these big bastards. By the end of the week, I'll have it eating out of my hand. The sergeant was making a good case. If Balog's able to train the Nahalim, it will save a lot of lives on our side of this conflict. If he fails, though, we'll have lost good orcs and still have to face the enemy's barricade. We could try to starve out the enemy, but their leader has fully demonstrated that he isn't a fool, so he probably has a plan for that course of action. I looked at Harmy for guidance, but the furrow in his brow told me that he was just as lost as I. I took a deep breath through my nose and let it out through my mouth. Fine, I said. Train the Nahalim. We'll try to use it in an assault on the enemy fortifications once it's ready. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this. I woke up feeling fully rested for the first time in quite a while. As I stretched away the remaining stiffness in my muscles, I found myself enjoying the fluffiness of the bedding against my skin. I hadn't been able to enjoy it much last night because I'd passed out right as my head hit the pillow. It had been an exhausting week of training and translating, but all that's over now. Well, the translating at least. I'm sure Nash has something evil in mind for when we're on the road. I let out a sigh when I realized I would have to be leaving this bed. The bed isn't even the best part about the inn, though. I'd been able to get a warm shower, a shave, and a haircut as well. I didn't have much beard to shave, of course, but the hairs under my nose and on my chin had been getting annoying. The shower was amazing, and very much needed. I'd become accustomed to my stench for the most part, but every now and again I'd get a whiff that made my eyes water. Reluctantly, I left the softness of my bed and found my clothes. The Marfix Inn also had a laundry service, and I had taken full advantage of it to get my clothing and armor cleaned. On the wall near the door were 2 boxes that had conveyor belts inside them. In one box, I found my clothes neatly folded alongside my armor, and in the other box, I found the breakfast I had ordered. When we first began staying at the inn, my meal orders had raised eyebrows, but now the staff was used to it. They even made recommendations of things that they thought might taste good together. Normally, I don't bother with a breakfast order and just pick something up from a stall, but I get 1 free meal a day during my stay, and I wanted to use it on our last day here. The wonderful smell of the breakfast convinced me that I had made the right choice. There were 2 sides, one of thin meat strips that tasted like a mixture of canned ham and beef jerky, and a vegetable that looked like a dark green celery stick but tasted like asparagus. I'd been hesitant to try it at first due to my hatred of celery, but one of the elven chefs convinced me to give it a try. Now I regret not ordering it sooner. The entree was a mixture of eggs and meat, and I didn't know which animal either were from. This made me a little hesitant to try it, but the smell helped me fight off my doubts. I picked at my breakfast as I pulled on my clothes and armor. Unsurprisingly, the food was really good. Once I finished dressing myself, I moved my meal to the small table in the corner of the room and dug in. My breakfast rapidly vanished, and once I was finished, I leaned back and let the well-padded chair comfort me. I let out a burp, then reached into my nearly bulging coin purse and brought out a gold coin, placing it on the table next to the meal tray before turning my attention to putting my armor on. Once I squeezed into everything and all the straps were tied, I took one last look around. The room itself was tastefully decorated with wooden walls and engraved stone trim. They had used a light-colored wood which seemed to glow when the curtains were open. The window was able to be opened, which wasn't something I had seen in many other places. There were also some well-done paintings depicting some exciting scenery, like a man arm-wrestling a dragon and a mage casting fireball. The bathroom had a toilet, sink, and the aforementioned shower. Even without any additional decorations, it was the fanciest bathroom I'd ever personally seen. The toilet had a footrest and the shower had a seat, both of which made it easy to relax while taking care of business. I could see why Renb's co-worker said some people use the inn as their vacation destinations. My entire stay had felt like one. I felt a small pang of sadness when I realized how much I'm going to miss these luxuries, but comforted myself with the thought that we'll probably find another Marfix Inn during our travels. With another small sigh, I turned to the door and opened it to find Nash and Yulk waiting outside. Nash was holding his fist up as if he were about to knock. The 3 of us stared at each other awkwardly for a moment. "Oh, good, you're up," Yulk grinned. "Yep, he sure is," Nash nodded. "That's good. We can get on the road right away. Come on." I gave my room one final glance before I followed my brothers by adoption out of the inn. The staff bid us farewell as we left, urging us to visit again soon. We began to head to the place where Imlor had the cart set up when I spotted Regent Oakmore dashing our way. I debated whether or not to start running, but he caught up to us before I could make up my mind. "Hello, boys," he said with a beaming smile. "Glad I caught you before you left." "Why's that, sir?" Nash asked. "Your business with Nick is done, right? You already paid us and everything, Your Highness?" "Oh, yes, don't worry, I have no further jobs for you," Oakmore laughed. "The reason I wanted to catch you is to let you know that we would normally throw a goodbye celebration on account of Nick awakening our monarch and everything. Unfortunately, we can't due to, well, critical matters of state that must be addressed immediately." "That's all right, sir. I understand," I said. Good. I didn't want you to think we were terrible hosts or anything. Anyway, the next time you visit Bolasir, I'd ask that you send a message first so we can properly plan a thank you celebration." "We already had a feast. Surely that counts, Your Majesty," Yulk added. "Actually, the feast was specifically to celebrate the return of His Highness King Icinerath." The elf shrugged. "Royalty get their own party. Plus, combining celebrations is tacky. No, even if it must be delayed for the moment, I am required to insist that we do a proper celebration for Nick's contribution as soon as we are able. After a bit more back and forth on the merits of such a celebration, we relented to Oakmore's request, or demand disguised as a request, rather. Once we agreed, he merrily sent us on our way. People waved as we passed, which was a welcome change from the awkward stares that we got when we first arrived. They actually seemed happy when I waved back, too, which made me feel good. People had been friendly like this back home, and I hadn't realized how much I missed it. Before long, we found Imlor packing up his cart. "Hi, Imlor," I said as we approached. "Hey guys, you ready to hit the road?" he asked. "Yep," Nash said as he grabbed a heavy-looking sack from the gnome and carried it into the cart. "Very much so," Yulk agreed as he climbed into the cart after Nash. "While I've enjoyed our stay, I'd very much like to check the mail to see if Mother sent anything. I've been keeping her updated, but have told her to send her replies to Kirkana because we didn't know for sure how long we'd be in Bolasir." I took one last look around the city built within the trees. Renv had said his farewells yesterday because his uncle was taking him to see the rest of his family. It ended up being a bit of a twist of fate. Instead of Renv seeing us off, we had seen him off. However, it appeared that someone else may want to see us off. The someone that was moving our way at an unnaturally fast pace. Hey, guys?" I pointed at the figure racing toward us. In the time it took for Nash and Yulk to turn their heads to look, the unidentifiable figure got close enough for me to figure out that it was a certain female vampire. The next thing I knew, Olmyra the Eternal was standing beside me, carrying a duffel bag and looking at Yulk. I questioned my sanity when I realized that she didn't look like she'd been running at all. She was breathing normally, and her hair wasn't even out of place in the slightest. The hell kind of product does she use? "Hi, Olmyra," Yulk's smile beamed. "Come to see us off?" "And to chastise you." She placed her hands on her hips. "It isn't proper for a gentleman to fail to bid a lady goodbye, Yulk, even when he's the one doing the leaving." Yulk's smile faded. "Ah, I see. You're right. I apologize. I beg your forgiveness, milady." Yulk stood and bowed, while Nash and I gave the two of them a befuddled look. "I'll forgive you on the condition that you allow me to join your party," Olmyra smiled, showing the briefest hint of fang. "Really? Why do you want to travel with us?" Nash asked. "Well, the regent is now advisor to the king. An advisor having an advisor is a bit much," she chuckled. "Plus, the king already has an immortal magical advisor, a djinn by the name of, Relf, I think it was. Yssinarath retrieved him yesterday. So I am out of a job, haven't traveled in well over a century, and can't help but wonder what sort of hijinks my favorite pupil is going to get into with this human here." As she was explaining herself, I turned to look back the way she had came. It had to be at least a half a mile from where I had initially spotted her, and it was a decent uphill gradient as well. She'd run that distance in less than 10 seconds without looking the least bit fazed. And to top it off, she's a magic user. She could be pretty helpful in a fight. "I suggest we bring her along," Ten said. "Her relationship with Yulk leads me to believe that she has a vested interest in helping us, and she would be a powerful ally." "Quit reading my mind," I replied. "I can't read your mind without you directing your thoughts at me. Yet. I was simply inferring based the context and your current gaze." "It would be an honor to travel with you, Lady Olmyra," Yulk said. "Wait a minute," Nash interrupted. "What are you going to do about blood?" Olmyra held up a jug and shook it. "I'm bringing some with me. Despite my youthful appearance, I'm an elder vampire. I don't need to feed as much as younger vampires do, so this is well over a year's supply. Plus, I can visit a blood keeper if I need to top up." "Are you royalty or nobility or something?" I asked. "Pardon?" She gave me a confused look. "Oh, because of Yulk. No, I'm not. Not anymore. I was a noblewoman before I was turned, but my title was revoked due to my conversion to vampirism. Immortals aren't allowed to be nobles in Eldravia." "Eldravia? A nation to the south of Bolasir and the unified chiefdoms," Yulk interjected. "Yes. Eldravia is known for its wine and multi-species elected monarchy. Yulk previously learned of my noble heritage and insists upon calling me by my former honorifics," Olmyra explained. It used to annoy me, but I've long since grown used to it. Oh, okay, good, I laughed. I didn't want to have to walk on eggshells the whole journey. Anyway, I'm obviously fine with Elmira traveling with us, Yulk grinned. Are there any objections? Nope, I said. I guess not, Nash shrugged. It'll be good to have another guard, I suppose, Imlor chimed in. It's unanimous, then. Allow me, milady. Yulk stood and offered his hand to Elmira. She took his hand and climbed into the cart, taking a seat next to Yulk. I climbed up after her and took my seat next to Nash. Let our hopefully uninteresting journey begin, Imlor said, turning back toward the Narses. The carts began to move, and I watched as the city that is constantly shaded by trees slowly shrank into the distance. Once we cleared those trees, my eyes stung trying to adjust to all the extra sunlight. We traveled for about an hour in silence before my curiosity got the better of me. So what's Eldravia like, Elmira? I asked. I really wouldn't know what it's like these days, the vampire smiled sadly. It's been well over a century since I left, and I haven't had reason to return, nor do I seek out news of my homeland. I can tell you what it used to be like, though. Yes, please. All right. Eldravia had massive tracts of land dedicated to growing fruit. Trees, bushes, and vines littered the landscape. These fruits were used to make all sorts of alcohol, but wine was by far the most popular. Most noble houses either directly owned or were heavily invested in wineries and the farms that supplied them. A nation of drunks? Nash asked. Elmira laughed. Actually, most of their wine ended up exported. Eldravia doesn't have much in the way of metallic resources, so trade was important to make up the deficit. The quality of our wine made certain that it fetched a high price, so much so that it actually aided in our diplomacy, which in turn ended up being crucial for our national defense. What do you mean? I'll give you an example that happened before I was born. Plamorno, one of the nations that border Eldravia, declared war as part of an expansion campaign. They won easily, but the people of Eldravia stopped making wine in protest. Once the wine stopped flowing, other neighboring nations, including the unified chiefdoms, declared war on Plamorno to force it to give Eldravia back its independence. However, this war didn't get very far because the citizens of Plamorno revolted against their queen. She was executed along with most of their nobility, and Eldravia became independent once again. Wow, I whistled. People really like wine, I guess. So you said Eldravia's led by an elected monarchy? How does that work? A multi-species elected monarchy, she corrected me. Essentially, nobility is decided by influence rather than by blood or species. Whoever can wave the most gold around becomes nobility, which results in their family also becoming nobility and forming a noble house. It is from these houses that candidates for the throne are chosen, and the general populace votes on which candidate becomes king or queen. These monarchs decide upon the laws of the land and rule until death, or they are deposed. Deposed? Yes. If a monarch doesn't live up to expectations, the noble houses have the right to dethrone them. They actually get together once per year to vote on whether or not to do so. It takes a 4/5 majority vote to get a king or queen off their throne. Doesn't the monarch put up a fight? They don't have their own military forces, so they have to rely on the forces of their house, assuming their house didn't vote to dethrone them, of course. Either way, any military they could muster would be heavily outnumbered, and they would likely face execution for their efforts. I see. So back to the noble houses. How do they become noble? If a monarch takes note of someone's accomplishments, they elect them as a candidate for nobility. The populace, including the other nobles, then vote on whether or not this individual becomes a noble. If they do, they become the leader of a noble house comprised of their family members. If they don't, then they go about their business until next time. Sorry to interrupt, Imlor said. If we're going to have lunch today, now's the best time to do it. All right, let's take a break then, Nash replied. Imlor nodded, then pulled the cart off of the road. We all climbed off and stretched our legs, then had a quick meal of dried meats and water, except for Elmira, who didn't eat or drink. Once he finished his piece of road jerky, Nash walked up to me with an evil grin. The grin alone told me what was coming, and I felt a familiar dread begin to well up within my chest. Time for training, Nick.